This is the Almost Timely newsletter for the week of June 18th, 2023. Content authenticity statement: 100% of this newsletter was generated by me, the human. When I do use AI-generated content, I will prominently disclose it. What's on my mind this week? The importance of open source AI. Today, let's talk about open source and artificial intelligence, because this is a topic that is super important to me personally, as well as the growth of AI overall. First, let's make clear our definitions. Open source software is software published as source code that others make available to use, right? So what is source code? Most of the software you use on a daily basis is not source code. It is a compiled product, in the same way that a loaf of bread is a compiled product of wheat, water, and yeast, and a few other ingredients. Source code is the ingredients that make the finished product in software. Now, source code isn't usually itself usable, not for the most part. Now, there are exceptions like scripting languages like JavaScript and Python and R, but that's a whole other topic. When the source code is compiled, that's when we get a usable product like Microsoft Word or Angry Birds or Excel. Most of the time, source code is closed, meaning that the company that wrote the code is keeping it secret. They don't want anyone else to be able to take their ingredients and their recipe and compile them to make a competing product that's just as good as their product. KFC, for example, has never officially disclosed the secret 11 herbs and spices, right? It's mostly salt. Coca-Cola, their exact formula is a guarded secret. Now, these are examples of source code, closed source code, right? Recipes and ingredients that are kept secrets for competitive advantage. The challenge with closed source code, or closed source for short, is that the onus of responsibility to make sure the software is bug-free is on the code maintainer, on the owner, in the same way that a company's secret recipes have to be harm-free, right? There are, for example, very tiny trace amounts of cocaine in Coca-Cola, though the amounts are so minuscule you'd probably get far more usable cocaine just by licking dollar bills randomly. The Coca-Cola company has to be sure that their recipe doesn't accidentally have, say, harmful amounts of cocaine in it. Open source code, or open source, is code published with the ingredients and recipes. Everyone and anyone can inspect the code, the recipe, the ingredients, to make sure it does what it says it does. Right? This also allows other people to contribute to it, to write more code into it, to edit it, as well as to make a copy and customize it. But it does cause a significant problem for-profit ventures. There's no real way to sell this stuff, right? Open source, by definition, is free and open, which means that anyone can take the code, right, the ingredients in the recipe, and make their own product, which is identical to the original. That's why you see so many open source software products run by nonprofit foundations like the Apache Foundation, the Linux Foundation, the Matomo Foundation, the Mautic Foundation, etc. These companies, which are nonprofits, earn revenue through donations and some commercial licensing or professional services. Like, for example, Red Hat was bought by IBM, not for the free version of Linux it makes, but for the professional services that surround it. But the core product, the source code, is open and available and free. This, by the way, is also why open source products dominate the tech landscape. It's hard to beat free. Now, not all open source products are run by foundations. For example, the Android operating system made by Google, that's open source. And critically and relevant to our discussion, there's a burgeoning open source community in AI. Some products in the AI ecosystem are very closed, like the GPT-3 model, the GPT-4 models that are created by OpenAI, which power the ChatGPT interface you're used to, or the Palm model that powers Google Bard. However, there are entire families of open source models that have sprung up everywhere, from OpenAI's Whisper speech recognition software to large language models like Meta's Llama and its many, many derivatives. Open source software, it's not for everyone. What you trade in cost is time, effort, and knowledge. It is trivial to open up a web browser and use ChatGPT, which is why it's so popular, right? It is far less trivial to find an open source project, go to GitHub, pull the repository, compile the code on your computer, turning the source code into the finished product, customizing it, setting all the parameters, tuning it, and then running the code yourself. If even hearing that last sentence makes you feel slightly queasy, then you might be wondering why anyone would go through that effort when the easy alternatives like ChatGPT exist. The answer, in a word, is choice. Open source software gives us far more choices and more flexibility than closed source software, especially in the world of AI. Let's take voice transcription, speech transcription as an example. Go online and you'll find dozens, if not hundreds, of SaaS-based voice transcription services. And they all promise, pretty much the same thing: good transcription quality, varying prices. But almost none of them offer you substantial choices. Like what? Well, there's a linear relationship between processing costs, time and computing power, and accuracy. The better the results, the more computing power and the better the model has to be to achieve those results. Closed source software and SaaS offerings are like prepackaged meals in the freezer section at your grocery store, right? They're stupid easy to make. Just unwrap it, stick it in the microwave, and boom, your food's done 5 minutes later. But you don't get any choice in how it's prepared, right? You have to hunt for the right vendor whose product requires you to compromise the least. Suppose you need food that's gluten-free, low-fat, and low-sodium. Finding a vendor that offers all three is almost impossible. The same is true in AI. Suppose you want specific language offerings because you're transcribing different languages. Plus, you want accurate transcription and a reasonable turnaround time. And suppose your needs are variable. Sometimes you want a fast transcription, like that time you were about to run into a client meeting and you just needed a quick summary of the most recent client call because you forgot. Never had that happen. Other times, you want a highly accurate transcription, like when you interviewed your favorite influencer and you want to get their words exactly right. Closed source software vendors and SaaS vendors don't give you those options, right? Partly because they can be bewildering, and partly because some offerings would impose much higher costs on them. So you get what's in the prepackaged offering. You get what you get, right? What's in the box is what you get. Open source software doesn't have this problem. An open source package like Whisper runs on your computer and comes with 5 different models of varying size and computational requirements. You decide when you build it and when you run it on your computer what compromises you want to make. And that can be on a per job basis, right? You can run the short, quick task now. You can run the long task later. You can decide how long you want a transcription to take and how much accuracy you want to choose to sacrifice, right? If a closed source software package is a prepackaged meal, then open source software is a book of recipes and a pile of ingredients, right? You have to decide how you want to make the finished product, but in the process, you have a lot more choice over it. You could make it gluten-free and low-fat and low-sodium, right? You can do that when you're cooking it yourself. And that's really the essence of it. Closed source, the meal's cooked for you. Open source, you cook the meal. In the same way that you cooking at home is a lot cheaper than buying prepackaged or buying a takeout all the time. You're trading off, right? You're trading time and effort for lower cost and control. Open source means more choice, and part of that choice is censorship or the lack thereof. This past week, I talked about censorship in artificial intelligence models and how it negatively impacts the models themselves. There are plenty of tasks where you most definitely want censorship, right? You do not want a chatbot that's doing your customer service on your website to start busting out, racist or sexist or bigoted language. No, you definitely don't want that. That should be fairly obvious. But the trade-off for that, because of the way models work, is your AI model is less creative. Now, again, with a customer service chatbot, that's probably a more than acceptable trade-off. You don't want to get too creative in general to answer questions, right? For a chatbot where you want to use it for brainstorming, maybe you want the safeties off for that in a controlled environment, in a research context or creative context where you're by yourself, where inappropriate responses aren't going to cause material harm to other people or to your company. But maybe you want that creative control, and you can't get that in a closed source model. Suppose you're writing some fiction and there's a certain type of scene you want to write. ChatGPT won't write those at all, right? So you would have, in an open source model, you can choose to say like, yeah, I will accept language that is coarse, or I will accept language that's profane because I'm willing to integrate that into the kind of writing that I'm doing. So that's where these open source models play a key role. You can use them without those restrictions. There's one other aspect to many of these open source AI projects that should be on everyone's mind: privacy. When you run an AI model locally on your computer and it's self-contained, meaning you're not using any third-party services like ChatGPT, what you do with that model is completely private. Your data doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't even leave your laptop, much less go to a third party in the cloud, right? I talk about this in my Intelligence Revolution presentation. If you want to use large language models with any kind of sensitive information, you must use open source models locally on your computer. They are the only models right now where you have an ironclad guarantee that sensitive information isn't leaking out of the contained environment you operate in. Think about voice transcription. Maybe you have a call that you want to have transcribed, but maybe it's really, really, really secret. Right? Maybe it's an upcoming merger, or maybe you're working in government or military. Do you really want to be loading that audio to some third party? No, you want that on your machine, all of it run locally so that it never, ever, ever leaves. That's one of the things that open source models do. So let's finish off today with the easiest, simplest, lowest tech implementation of an open source model that you can get. Totally free, runs on your computer if you have enough memory, and totally private. This is a piece of software called GPT-4All, which you can download at GPT-4All, GPT, the number 4, all.io. And there's a link in the newsletter to download it. You don't have to compile it, right? You'll just go out on the website and find a version that applies for your operating system, download it, and run the installer. It's one of the easiest packages to use. Once the application's on your computer, you open it up, you go through, answer a couple of questions. By the way, generally speaking, there's an option to load data into the cloud. Say no. You'll go through those configuration questions, then you'll go to the model management menu on the left-hand side. It's called labeled downloads. From there, based on your needs and requirements, choose the kind of model that you want to work with. They all have little descriptions next to them. After that, select the model of choice from the menu, and then you use the software as you would use ChatGPT and other similar tools. Now, you will note that it might, depending on the kind of computer you have, it might be slower than, say, something like ChatGPT. Again, it's a trade-off. When you use a service like ChatGPT, you are using someone else's hardware and software with the limitations on your choices that they impose and the relative lack of privacy. When you use open source models and technology, you tend to have more choices, but it comes at a trade-off of sometimes speed, depending on the computational power you have and the kind of computer you use. Open source software is not a drop-in replacement for everything, nor should it be. But it is an essential part of keeping the big monolithic tech companies honest by ensuring that there's more democratized access to AI technologies for everyone, not just the people who can afford it. What else is happening this week? So, as of today, there are 13 days before Universal Analytics shuts off, and Google Analytics 4 is the only game in town. If you need to get up to speed quickly, there's a link, of course, to the GA4 course that you can take that will get you up to speed quickly. It's about 5.5 hours of training time, but it's broken up into chunks. Or just hit reply, because, again, this is what my company does. Now, granted, it's kind of busy because a lot of people waited, but we will help with that. Go watch that piece I did this week on how censorship damages large language models, because I think it's really important to understand the mechanisms, the architecture, and how things like censorship impact the technical models themselves. So take a look at that. I also did a piece on spatial computing after Apple's new goggles announcement, the Apple Vision Pro. Upcoming jobs this week, we had a bunch of new stuff. We have Adobe Analytics developer at Shift Labs, Analytics Architect at Search Discovery, Data Engineer at Foundation Direct, Digital Marketing Manager at Boston Scientific, Digital Technical Analyst at Grainger, Growth Marketing Exec at Paylocity, Manager of Data Privacy at Paylocity, Marketing Analytics Lead at Foundation Direct, and Regional Marketing Analytics Manager at Colgate. Some pretty cool stuff there. The big ad for this week, If you like the intelligence revolution talk that I give and you want to bring it to your company, your organization, maybe your group, there's a link to go do that. In other news, Twitter's ad buyers want answers on user-generated content and content moderation. Huge surprise. Who could have seen that coming when you say, hey, it's absolute freedom of speech? Well, yeah, sure. But as my HR director once said, you can do anything you want, but there are consequences, right? We got content marketing tips, preparations for crisis. In the SEO section, largest contentful paint explained and what you should be doing about it. McKinsey saying on the AI front that generative AI will contribute $4.4 trillion annually to growth, which is probable. We have a big updates from OpenAI this week, some restaurant industry statistics, and some interesting academic papers on the evaluations of models and speech. So that's all the news. Upcoming events, I will be at MAICON in July. In just a couple of weeks, though, I will be at the AI for Content Creators virtual event with Marketing Profs. For MAICON, I think the discount code is PEN100 for $100 off the ticket. That's going to be a fun show. Got a lot of really cool things coming up there. I'll also be doing an event in August with Marketing Profs. I don't think we've announced anything yet, but it's going to be kind of a game show. So get ready for that. Content Jam in Chicago in September, followed by ISBM, and then Content Marketing World in DC. Then Marketing Analytics and Data Science, and then Marketing Profs B2B Forum in October. So really full dance card for the summer and fall. If you'll be at any of those events, please say hi. I'd love to say hello and chat about all the nerdy stuff we chat about all the time. Thank you for watching or listening or tuning in, however you got this newsletter. I appreciate it. I appreciate you. And I'll talk to you next time. Take care. If you like this video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button.